Let's talk about JavaScript's grammar. I know grammar is the word. So when you talk about JavaScript syntax, it is like the grammar that you follow whenever you're speaking English or any other language that you're learning, really. Because, for example, if you're writing a sentence in English, it has to start with a capital letter, then it has to end with a full stop, right? And you know where to put commas, all those punctuations that you have to follow. So that in JavaScript and programming in general, we refer to that as syntax. They help you to read and write JavaScript code. And we're going to start with just the very basics on of how you do this. We're going to learn more about this syntax as we go, as we write many JavaScript concepts, because each of the concepts we're going to be looking at, it has a different sort of syntax that you have to follow, but everything is pretty consistent, so nothing to worry about. So JavaScript has its own rules for writing code, and if you follow those rules correctly, your computer can basically read your instructions and follow those instructions as you instruct it to. The basic thing that we can start with, and allow me to just okay, we're going to start with this first line of code that we wrote earlier. The basic thing we need to start with is statements and semicolons in JavaScript. So a statement in JavaScript is one complete instruction. I'll repeat on that. A statement is one complete instruction in JavaScript. Then a semicolon is what you write at the end of a statement. So think of it as the full stop that you write in the at the end of of an English statement or English sentence. So you have a semicolon right there at the end. This is going to signify the end of the statement. Remember, a statement is one complete instruction. The semicolon is going to signify the end of that statement. So in this case, think of it just like this, the full stop of an English statement. I don't think there's much to say on that as well. But now, one thing to note about the semicolons is that semicolons are optional in many cases in JavaScript. So basically, JavaScript is going to insert them for you automatically because they're optional. But it's a good habit to write them because there are certain aspects that you'll probably want to do this. So at any point, if you notice that I'm not using a semicolon or sometimes I'm using it, it's just that semicolons they're optional in JavaScript. So that is the first thing. I'll actually just write here as a comment. I'll just write statements and semicolon. Okay, semicolon should be, I'll just have it like that. The next thing to understand when it comes to the syntax of JavaScript is comments. Now, I've mentioned comment right now, and you've probably wondered what that is. So comments are basically notes that you leave for yourself or any other person who's going to read your code so that they can understand what you are writing. But the one thing to note about these comments is that your computer is going to ignore the comments whenever it's running your code. So how you write comments, we have different types of comments. We have single line comments. Single line comments are the one that I've written. You basically have two forward slashes. Or if you don't want to type them in like that, just have control forward slash, and it's going to automatically put them there for you. And here you can just write any comment that you write. So for example, I can just say something like, this is a single line comment, like that. And we also have what we refer to as multi-line comments. Multi-line comments, as the term says, these are comments that can span multiple lines. Because if you write a single line like this, if you move to a new line and you start writing something else, then it's going to be noted as an error in JavaScript. So you don't want to be doing that. What you do is, if your a comment spans multiple lines, you'll have a forward slash, then you have an asterisk sign, and then you also have an asterisk sign and a forward slash. Now, in between here, you can have this span multiple lines. So for example, you can say this code spans multiple lines. As you can see, I'm able to write the comment in multiple lines, and it's basically highlighted as a comment, as you can see here. So this is just like any margin notes you'll probably write in your notebook, so that you or your classmates or anyone else that you're learning with can be able to read those margin notes. But those margin notes do not really change the content, right? So same thing as whenever you're reading, let's say, a book, and you want to have some notes for yourself to understand that you write them at the top of the book, or just at the margins of those books as well, just as a way for you to help you understand what you are writing later on, or just as a note for someone else. So Google Docs also has something really good for this as well, where you can be able to write comments on any aspect, any specific document that you're writing, so that in case someone else wants to read through the document, they can also look at your notes. There could be notes that you're writing for them to understand further, or just give further instructions to anyone else who is looking at that. So that is what we refer to as comments. The other thing that we need to understand about when you're talking about, I'll write this as a comment here as well. The other thing to understand about syntax is white spacing. So white spacing, right here as white spacing and formatting. White spacing and formatting, these are very, very important. So here we refer to the spaces, the tabs, and the line breaks that are going to write in your code to make your code easier to read. But JavaScript mostly ignores these kinds of white spaces and comments, but they're very important. So for example, as you can see here, we wrote the first line of code console, then we added as a new line, then moved to the next one. They're mostly good for readability purposes, but JavaScript ignores them most of the time. So it is the same thing as if you're writing an essay, then you have a paragraph, and then you'll either jump or a line, or just have some spaces left so that someone can be able to distinguish between the first paragraph and the second paragraph. They're good for readability and for you to just understand what you're doing and someone else. The other thing we need to understand about JavaScript is case sensitivity. Case sensitivity. Okay, I need to just, yeah, that is good. So case sensitivity, this is what we refer to as the uppercase or lowercase. JavaScript is case sensitive as well. And what this means is that, for example, we've written console.log like this. So we'll just say console.log, then you have a statement like, let's say, okay, I need to have an uppercase. Let's say hello world, like, right? So let's say this is your statement here. This is different. Note that console.log is in lowercase. It's different from saying console.log. Then you have another statement that says, let's say, country like Kenya. Then, okay, this, as you can see, the moment I saved, because of the extension that we installed earlier, it has been able to autocorrect everything I've written here. But if you use a capital letter like that, that is not the same as what you have in line 14. This is a wrong syntax. So if you run your code with this, I've saved, and actually let's run our code. I'm going to just pull up the terminal here, and I'm going to run this code one more time. As you can see here, we get an error, and it says it's a reference error, console is not defined. The reason it's telling us that console is not defined is because this is not, once you change the casing like this, it is no longer an inbuilt JavaScript method that you're using, or a JavaScript keyword. So it assumes that it was some sort of variable that you defined earlier on that you need to understand. We're going to talk about variables in the next video, but variables are how we store information in JavaScript. So this should show you that case sensitivity is very, very important here. So you have to follow the exact casing the JavaScript wants you to follow. Now it's also, I think how you can think of it is whenever you're writing someone's name, if you write the name in uppercase or lowercase, it's just very, even the way you'll perceive that information is different. If it is written in starts with an uppercase and it's a name of a person, you can automatically think of it that as the name of a person. But if it starts in lowercase, you wouldn't ideally process it as a name. You just think of maybe someone made an error whenever they were doing this, so that creates a reference error. The other thing to understand about JavaScript is what we refer to as blocks. So we have blocks and curly braces. So, and curly braces like that. So these curly braces that we're talking about, these are like this. You have the normal curly braces. Then you write your code inside here. So let me say I write console.log. Then I say something like statement. Then you can have multiple lines of this. So what you can see here with these curly braces that we have, we can be able to write multiple statements, but those multiple statements are within the same block. So this here, this is a block because everything is within these curly braces. And this is going to be very important later on when you start looking at The further, for example, logic of lot of programs, when we start talking about functions, this is going to be very important. So this is what we refer to as a block. So you can have multiple of these blocks. You can have, okay, so you can have this as the first block. I've just copied and pasted it here, and this will be another block that talks about something else. But we're going to see them later when you talk about functions, loops, and conditionals. They're going to make a lot more sense when you talk about them at that point. The other aspect to understand when it comes to syntax in JavaScript is keywords. So keywords are very important. So let's call them just keywords and identifiers. So when you talk about keywords and identifiers, here we're referring to the reserved JavaScript names. So let's think of it as just names that have been reserved in JavaScript. Those are what we refer to as keywords that you can't use as any normal, let's say, variable name in your program, right? So like I mentioned, variables are how we store data. We're going to talk about this in the next video, but when you're talking about, for example, you've seen a word like console, right? So you've seen that console, this is an inbuilt keyword in JavaScript. So you cannot use console as a variable name later on, right? So the same thing as the words such as log, we are going to see words such as if, we're also going to see words such as function, we're going to see most of these words, and these are already inbuilt into JavaScript. We refer to them as reserved keywords. So we can't use them as the normal names that we're going to see as we proceed. Then identifiers are names that you choose to refer to things, right? For example, I've mentioned something like variables, right? Now, this variable, this is an identifier, right? I've mentioned something like functions, and we saw this when we were looking at the roadmap. These are identifiers. These are not just any normal names that you'd use within your code as normal names, right? So these are what you refer to as identifiers. So you wouldn't, for example, you didn't name yourself, you didn't give someone a name like you refer to someone as import, right? You can't refer to someone as like variable. For example, imagine if your name was variable, like it doesn't make sense for you to do that. I do hope that makes sense. I'm sure there are people who are crazy enough to call themselves that, but it's not within the norms that we sort of work within. So these words are, we refer to them as special words, and they do some special jobs within JavaScript. The other thing to understand about the syntax of JavaScript is, let's refer to this as, let's call them string literals. So I'll just call this as string literals. And string literals, this is text that is wrapped within single quotes or within double quotes, right? So what we've seen is, for example, you can say console.log. I know we've written so many console.logs, but it's important so that we don't confuse with many concepts that we haven't covered already. So you can say console.log, then use a single keyword and then say a statement like hi there, right? So these are what we refer to as string literals. And then you can also do the same, but you now use double quotes, right? Double quotes. Okay, let me just change the statement here and use something like welcome. Right. So what you can see here, these are two different. These are what we refer to as string literals. Either of these styles, they do work, whether you use a single quote or a double quote. But whenever you're using them within your code, you just need to be consistent. You need to be consistent so that you can avoid mixing them, because if you mix them, then that creates a lot of confusion. But they still do work the same nonetheless. So just writing them to do simple quotations. We're going to see now any statement that is actually wrapped within this single quotes or double quotes. That is what we refer to as a string. A string is a data type, which is a concept we're going to talk about in the next second or third video. Once we talked about this, there are many things that also do come on top of this, but we're going to just see this a lot more as we look at different functions and different concepts in JavaScript. You're going to notice that every concept has a different way of writing it. There are certain rules that I'm going to try and insist on so that you can follow along, which if you don't follow those rules, your program is going to fail. Remember what you mentioned at the beginning. This syntax are the rules that once you follow these rules exactly as they're supposed to be followed, then your computer is going to carry out the instructions that you gave it. It's going to execute those instructions. So you have to follow these rules as they are supposed to be followed. But that is basically it on just an introduction into JavaScript syntax, and I'll see you in the next video.